Ah, for... LIBER SPUD! Teresa, I wanted to get you on. You're my first interviewee. I wanted to get you on because you have a book out called Secrets of the Druids, and it's a second edition. And I went kind of searching for people to have on the podcast, and this one just sang to me because anyone who's listening to the podcast will know I'm kind of dipping my toe into the Druid stuff. So tell us please about the book. No, tell you what. Let's start with, where can people find you on the internet first, and your like social media, and where people can buy the book, and then please if you can tell us about the book.
Well, I'm on Facebook already. I've been there for since 2007. I've had a Facebook account, but you'll find me under Teresa Cross. My middle name I use because there are other Teresa Crosses out there. I wrote the book over 30 years ago, but I changed it up quite a bit and included a lot more information in the second edition. Mm-hmm. And to make things a little more uniform, I used Old Irish words and vocabulary instead of Old Celtic. Okay. And I got an apparatus at the beginning of the book so you can kind of follow along, you know, how it is. And in I have an appendix so you know how to pronounce the words. And a simplified grammar of Gaulish I even put in there. Yeah, the book is about what the Druids did. And if you want to know what the big secret is, as secrets go, and the Druids had their secrets, the Druids were a part of the system of Indo-European culture. You know, that inherited, the Celtic inherited its language rooted in on the Indo-European family tree. A lot of people ignore that because they're afraid of talking about the Indo-European religion and culture, but there are some books out there that are accessible to the layman on it.
Do you know who was the first to come up with that? Because I know like there's loads of books from, say, 70, 100 years ago, and they have this kind of they try and link like the Tuatha Danann with the Daneans, I think, or Danoans. They were like a kind of an Israelite type of tribe from that part of the world. But was it because I think the first that I could find of it is Miles Dillon. He put this forward. Was it him or was it someone else?
It must have been someone else because it's somebody older than Miles Dillon. Miles Dillon was 20th century, and he wrote a book called Celt and Aryan, talking about the ancient. When you say Aryan, that's a loaded word. People think of a race, and but actually, the idea of the tribe of Dan, D-A-N. That's a false etymology. It was supported by British Israelites who are trying to prove that Celts and Saxons and all were descended from lost tribes of Israel, that's been proven wrong a long time ago. The only people who grasp on that are certain religious groups. That was a 19th century idea. The other one was a connection with the Greek Danaans, but Danu, D-A-N-U, in Old Irish, comes from the Indo-European word Danu, which meant water, to flow and to drip, water like river water. And it was considered alive, you know. And the Indo-European group that preserves that same name is the ancient Vedic Hindus have it in a group of sky and water deities, and Danu is female, is a female gender name. But the Tuatha Danann in Irish literature seems to have represented the old divinities of Ireland and the Gaels, and they seem to resemble some kind of pantheon in the Laur Gwaile Éireann, and Book of Invasions, as a people. Well, that's reverse euhemerism. That's what Europeans did after Christianization. They tried to say that their old deities that they used to worship were actually ancestors, that in some kind of scheme. You get that in Greek literature too, so as well as Roman. But in the book, I put a chart to show you. There's a formulaic phrase to summarize the Tua De Danann versus the Fulmers, called, they usually list Lu, Ogma, and the Dida. And the Dida, or Dagda, some people might mispronounce it.
Oh, I'm one of them.
And it's the Dida was means good God, good at things. But he seems to be a fertility figure and a figure of plenty in the mythology. And then there's Breed, Bridget, as she's anglicized, as the same saint and goddess. There's a goddess Breed, and then there's the saint Breed. The saint is described almost mythologically as if she was a midwife to Mary, but they also describe a deity named Breed, who means, this word means the high one in Old Irish, Brigit, with a dot over the G to represent a softening or chevu. And she seems to be a sun goddess, a fire goddess, kind of like Vesta or Hestia. They had even versions dedicated to keeping her sacred fires going. She's a very, very important goddess in the Largawala Aaron and then various other tales. But the saint was said to be very generous, and she sold off some of her gifts to feed the poor. And so that's how that shapes in modern hagiography and mythology. So there's kind of a blurring between the goddess and the saint.
Yeah, I remember when I don't remember when and where I was or anything like that, but I remember my mind being blown that St. Bridget wasn't who we thought she was in school, because, we're taught that St. Patrick came and saved us all in school, and then St. Bridget was very soon after him. But then, when I think would have been in high school, then one of the history teachers would have told us about, well, actually, Bridget is probably based on a much older god who was Christianized. And I was like, they did that? What the fuck? Were they allowed to do that? For me, it was just crazy that they would take these old ones and just remodel them and to fit into the new the new kind of the new religion that was taking over.
Yeah, they St. Patrick came and he was sent. Along with there was a bishop named Palladius from Gaul who was sent by Pope Celestine to lead Christians in Ireland. There must have been a growing number of Christians before Patrick.
Sure, yeah.
That were people that were enslaved from Roman Britain who were already Christian and brought over there, just like St. Patrick himself, and who was a Romano-British teenager, about 16 years old, and he was captured and brought to Ireland. And then all kinds of legends grew up about him, with the shamrock and the teaching the Trinity from a shamrock, and about him driving snakes out of Ireland. Those are rather late stories. And they come up with some of that material way after Patrick's time. Way after, centuries later.
You mentioned one in the book about St. Patrick apparently ordered the burning of, I don't remember the number, it was like 100 and so many books with Druid knowledge. And that was, I've only heard of that only once or twice before. And it's interesting because most people say that the Druids and the Fili, they didn't keep any written records, but here it is said that Patrick ordered the burning of these books that had this knowledge. Yeah,
that's another one of those legends, I believe, because Druids and Fili and the Olives and all them, the learned class, taught by oral instruction. And so in a way, their teachings were taught in the old schools of Filioch, and which now they call those the Bardic schools.
Mm-hmm.
They would take up to 15 years to become an Ullub, which is the highest thing. It means professor in modern Gaelic. Druids did by oral instruction, just like Caesar mentioned about the Gaulish Druid. And then there's the Fili, which seemed to took the place of the Druids in the early Middle Ages. And they had schools of Filioch, or poetry. And literally, Fili means seer, and but seer with a S-E-E-R, one who can envision things. And Druids fell out of favor after Christianization, so they just renamed them Fili. It looks like from the way the history goes. It took 20 years, up to, as Caesar puts it in the De Bello Gallico, the War of the Gauls, that they took up to 20 years to learn to become Druids in the Druid schools. And so we kind of envision that as being something they taught in private to their classes, so that only people who were being fostered in the Druidic schools would have the knowledge. And it was probably memorized, like the Brahmins of India do the same thing. Another thing, a misconception people have is that Druid comes from the word oak seer. It's not. It's an Indo-European root. Dru, D-R-U, is the zero grade form of Deru, which means firm, solid, steadfast. And then the Wade part, which becomes the ending of the word in early Celtic language, means seer. So it means he or she who is the firm and solid, steadfast intellect of the intelligentsia of the Celtic people. An interesting note, when the first edition of my book came out, a noted Irish Armagh rhymer, have you heard the Armagh rhymers?
No, I haven't, no.
There was one man named Seamus Tansey who liked my book, and I had a beer with him. I think we had Guinness at his trailer at an Irish festival. And he and his group came out there to entertain as Armagh rhymers dressed like straw boys, Yeah. He said that was, one thing I pointed out in the book, and I kind of changed some things in the book to make it a little more, less polemical, and was to describe it. The strange phenomena we have that I noticed is that Druids and Druidry, or Druidism as I prefer to call it, was a phenomenon of the Celtic people, particularly the Irish, the British, and the Gauls. But I thought it ironic that so many Englishmen are into Druidism.
Your first chapter, your first chapter, I was sending off quotes to Tommy, who is the head honcho of Adventures in Woo Woo, and he was it was hilarious because you have two in particular that I sent, and I thought they were. As soon as I read them, I was like, I love this lady because it was. I'm going to give them to you. It's how ironic it is that the people who destroy the last vestiges of the old Druidic traditions would pretend to be inheritors of the very tradition only a century later. And then a second one was you were talking about why scholars don't use or don't well they do now, but or they didn't tend to use sources of Irish books. They were instead going to like the Romans and the Greeks who spoke about. So you say like it's the authors who dismiss these Irish sources are mainly those who are too ignorant to understand their importance and the comparative Indo-European methods, or they are Englishmen. Hilarious.
And there's been a lot of there's a new phenomenon around these days called Celtic Christianity, and I belong to an order called the Community of Aidan and Hilda, and there's following the Aidan way. Well, Saint Aidan, of course, was from Iona, and from the Iona community, and he was sent to convert the Northumbrian Angles of Northumbria to Christianity, and by the invitation of a king. who had been raised in Iona, and he was an Angle, an Anglian or an Englishman.
Yeah.
And so they adopted the Celtic way of doing Christianity. Strangely enough, it was Steve Lindisfarne, Ray Simpson, who founded the order, and I'm a member of it. I'm in fact a Voyager in it, and I don't practice Druidism. I did in the 80s, but I came back to my native roots as a Christian. I was a Catholic who became Eastern Orthodox, who became Episcopalian.
Well, what has really gotten me interested in Druidry is that I have been learning about Imbas Forosni and the Taim Leda and the Dicknal I can't even pronounce it properly, Decatel de Conif. So these are types of, the most well-known is the Imbas, and this is knowledge which illuminates, and this is, it's in such myths as like Fionn McCool, and it's basically like, well, my imagining of it, it's like an awakening in a kind of Buddhist kind of way, And that's, I mean, when I started reading about this, I was like, oh my God, there's an Irish version of this. This really blew my mind, and it's quite hard to find anything that's on it. And I was really happy when I saw that your book dealt so much with, what the Druids actually did that we didn't know about,
The most secret thing I could say that the Druids did that most people do not realize is that at the sacrifices that they performed, there's a saying from the Seneca Smore that says that the Druids made everything, and
sure, they made the whole cosmos
through their sacrifices. Out of those sacrifices, and it's I forget the reference, but it is in the Seneca Smore, the Great History.
Actually, you know what? I took a note of that. I said the Seneca Smore states that the Druids said that they made the earth, sun, moon, and stars and other features of the cosmos. The sacrifice was the sustaining and perpetuating of the world as we know it, and can master the world. This goes back to what I stated in the last chapter on the laws of nature. Through sacrifice, the law of reciprocation is mastered.
What a Druid actually did can be seen in what they did in the later Bardic schools. The Thele would compose a panegyric or a praise poem, usually to augment the importance of the leader and their genealogy, usually a warlord or chieftain or a hero. And they would compose these, and they had their crut players, the crut, C-R-U-I-T, is a primitive harp, a kind of lyre that they played in ancient times. And they would have somebody recite it or sing it or chant it. And the Druid proper, him or herself, would sit to the side and make sure no mistakes were made and conducted the whole thing as a master of ceremonies. Well, what's interesting about the Olive or Philly doing this is that that's what Druids probably did at a sacrifice, because we have a parallel in Vedic India of Brahmins doing the very same thing. And so there's a lot of interesting parallels between what the medieval Irish were doing at the ceremonies and sacrifices and what we see in ancient India and other Indo-European groups. I've even seen some YouTube videos of Lithuanian sacrifices done.
They still practice. I've seen this too. The paganism is massive up there, and it's still very much practiced, and it looks very Celtic. But I suppose, Slavic people are Celts that didn't travel as far as as Ireland and Britain and all that,
Yeah, they're Indo-Europeans too.
Exactly,
the Lithuanians and the Slavic people and Baltic people, and they were one of the last of the peoples of Europe to have their paganism survive up into nearly the 20th century.
I see a lot of it here, actually. I live on the border with Poland and Czech Republic, and in Czech Republic, you still see a few statues of like the old gods. Particularly in my area, there's one called Radagast, and he was so cool that Tolkien just stole him and made him the nature god in his book, or nature wizard in his book. Yeah. That's pretty much what he was in Czech Republic as well. They have a beer named after him too. It's quite nice.
Radagast?
Radagast, yeah.
Yeah, I recall that. And another thing about Druids is that the Wiccans copycat stuff out of Celtic tradition and put their own spin on it. They've been doing that since Gerald Gardner in the 20th century started that Wicca thing, but
you're not a fan.
They don't know what to do with. Well, the thing is that they say it's the old religion, but there was no old religion. There were religions with the plural, and so there was we've counted over 300 different deities, and which most of them in just Gaul and Britain, whose names are sometimes said only once. What you got is a situation which local deities appear on inscriptions with Latin equivalents, because when the Romans took over Gaul, they tried to assimilate Gaulish religion into the Roman tradition, and they sometimes would hastily base it on one little attribute of that particular deity and say, oh, well, this is like Mars, or this is like Minerva, or this is like... So they had Roman deity types, and but a lot of people argue there's no such thing as a Celtic pantheon. Well, we have in the Irish traditions, the Tuatha Danann are listed, and some of the names of the characters of the Tuatha Danann are basically names of deities elsewhere in the older record, like Lugh of the long arm, Lugh Lawfata. His name is in the etymology of Lyon in Gaul or France and various other places throughout, and an inscription to the Lugawiss in Spain even. So, it's very telling that there may have been a pantheon developing that the Druids probably would have organized, but we didn't have, since there was no written culture, all we have is the Irish literature and vestiges of the Welsh literature that kind of converge.
Yeah.
And we have to go by that because we don't have anything else to go by.
It's all we have, isn't it?
Except the archaeology.
There's something interesting I've been reading as well, because in high school we're kind of told that, I mean, this kind of old history doesn't come up very often unless your history teacher has an interest in it. But I was lucky, I did have one. And he would tell us that, look, we don't know a lot about the ancient Irish stuff, because what happened was, when Christianity came, the monks wrote this down from local historians, or they would have an interest in it and they would write it. But, of course, it's going to have a slant of Christianity on it. But, since from reading your book and from reading a couple of other modern ones as well, there's this argument. It's not an argument. It's the fact of it. It's that, people gave they were patrons of monks. They wanted a monastery built on their land, and they would pay for all this, and then they would say to the monks, a bit like the Medicis in Renaissance Italy, they would say, look, I'm interested in this, can you write a book on it? And they would find the Fili, and the Fili were the kind of descendants of the Druids, and they would have worked for the royals or chieftains of the time, but they weren't Druids, but they still had a lot of this knowledge. I was glad to hear that because we're told that, oh no, it's a total Christianity thing on this, and it's not the way it was. Well, it turns out that, well, a lot of it actually was the way it was, so the way it was written.
Yeah, well, some of the very people that became priests and bishop abbots and monks who welcomed the education of Latin language and applying it to create the Old Irish language in a written form by borrowing the Latin alphabet. Some of the very people that were writing these things down had been Telian Druids and so forth. And they preserved a lot of the literature. There's the Time Voculia, that was recorded of Cuchulainn and his stories, and then you have the Fenian literature of Cian McCool, and then you have the Dinshenicus, the place name, oral place name traditions of how places got their names after things that happened, and that material was all written down, after they became literate, and that probably was memorized in the oral tradition of the filioque schools. And the filioque schools, as we remember, took up to 15 years to become an olive in it. And so we had something like the Druidic schools going on, it continued. And the literature is full of material that gives us a kind of a light shining in the darkness of all this oral tradition that eventually got written down in the Middle Ages. So it's very important to look at that literature and to look at it in comparison with what Greco-Roman commentators said about it, about the Gauls and the Britons. And you see that there's you can corroborate on the literature from it. Like Caesar says, Caesar knew a Druid. So he was getting first-hand information from Diviciacus of the Idwe, or I should anglicize his name, Diviciacus.
Yeah. There was Pliny as well. Pliny is supposed to have one of the stones, the healing stone, what are they called? The stones with the hole in it that you wear around your neck. I don't remember the name. Apparently he had one of these, but Pliny's word isn't exactly trustworthy. He told a lot of bullshit as well, did Pliny.
Pliny was interested in what we would call lore of nature, or Pliny was also a critic, and Pliny the elder also was a critic of Christianity. So, he didn't. In fact, he went on witch hunts against the Christians.
Yeah, that's right. We were talking a while ago about Catherine Nixon's book, I think her name is, The Darkening Age, and it really focuses on the how the Christian church just took down paganism after they gained control of Rome. But it's very much from a Roman Greco outlook. There's nothing at all about the Celts or even the Germanics north of that, or the Norsemen or anything like that. But I want to ask you about kind of spirituality of the Druids for a minute, because in the book you explain that they had a kind of notion of duality, but because it's Celtic, everything is done in a triplicate, so it's one is found in the other, but when the two come together, it actually makes a third. Right. Why? What was this fast? Why was everything done in trees?
Oh, well, now that's probably because they memorize things in triplicate. Three things that destroy knowledge. Let's see, how did it go? Misinformation, inaccurate knowledge, and forgetfulness.
Try it. Yeah, I have one here for you. No evil should be done, God should be worshipped, and manly behaviour maintained. Yeah, it's how they learned things was doing things in threes.
It's a good mnemonic device.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they used a lot of mnemonics in their teaching. Plus, they memorized verses, and stuff was in verse, in poetry, and that was easier to remember that way, because they could sing. In fact, the word for learning in Old Irish means to sing over. And the Vedic material was memorized, like the Rig Veda and Samveda, Yajur Veda. Those were memorized too over in ancient India. So,
if I can ask you as well about, because some people have gotten the Druids' idea of reincarnation a little bit wrong, and you say that while there was a kind of idea of reincarnation, it was different than the kind of thing that everyone is born, or people die, they kind of take a rest for a while and then come back. You say it's kind of like at the end of an ace or an age or an aeon, there's this Ragnarok, and that when a time comes to an end, that's when new things can start again.
Yeah, that's an Indo-European concept that's widespread, and it made it into the Norse Ragnarok, and it made it into some Greek materials too. And the idea is that the whole universe is cyclical. It is made, it's destroyed, and it's made again. And the Gaulish reference I had was from one of the Greco-Roman commentators. He said that, it may have been Strabo, who said that fire and water would prevail, that the universe is indestructible, but fire and water would prevail, which immediately I thought, oh, that's like Ragnarok when it's ice and fire prevail.
Of course, yeah,
destroys
exactly.
the world and it's all made again. But there was reincarnation, and in the old edition of my book, I followed metagenetic rebirth, but discovered that's more of a Germanic or Norse idea, not really a Celtic one. The Celts really believed in you could be reborn in another world. And there's a book by Llewellyn's Michael Newton called Journey of the Soul, and it's a good book about exploring reincarnation, for past lives and that sort of thing. We even Christianity has that revelation where everything is created new again by God.
Yeah, of course. So, I think even before the Council of Nicaea, it was in teaching that there was this kind of idea of reincarnation. Maybe it's not the same as what Hindus and Buddhists.
Well, they believed, earliest Christians believed that Jesus would come again.
I just wrote here in my notes, I want this to be true. I have the wisdom and five senses that we have within, coupled with the energy and warmth generated by our physical bodies, are the gods of heaven within us, making our bodies living perpetual sacrifices. So this is to go back to your earlier thing about sacrifices. This part of our body never physically dies, but lingers on to rejoin other energy sources in the transcendent realms. So this is just like what you said there.
Yeah.
The Irish Celts believed that the spirit would, turn up somewhere else.
Yeah, well, there's one saying that one of the Greco-Roman writers said that the soul is indestructible and like the cosmos, but there's a time when water and fire will prevail over it. But there also is comments about transmigration of souls and rebirth, and you don't get that much of it in Irish literature as you do the Greco-Romans and emphasizing it, but you do have rides into the other world, and so there's another world, and it's kind of like, it's very much like Hellenistic Greek thought. You go to a land of the dead, and they call that Chak Dun, after Dawn, which is the House of Dawn, D-O-N-N, and then there's warriors and Valhalla and the Teutonic tradition kind of parallel that, and then there's the idea in the Greek mythology that you cross water to get to the other world if you pay the boatman Chiron, and the ferryman who takes you across the River Lethe and the River Styx. And the Celts had a very strong belief in the afterlife, that they would sometimes repay debt in the next world.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Give me a lend of €500 there. I'll pay you back in the next life, okay? Yeah, all right.
Okay.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, they did believe that according to the Greco-Roman writers.
Yeah. And like when we were young growing up, like the stories of Tír na nÓg were the ones that were like, wow, you can go somewhere and be young and party forever. Yes. Where is this place?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes. Tír na nÓg, and there's Chak Dun, there's Chak Dun, and then there's let me think. There's like so many that I listed them in the book.
Yeah. There's Tír na nÓg,
literally is a list.
Tír na Beo, Tír na Al. There's loads. Apparently, Manon and MacLear is supposed to have come from one of them as well, because there was some other book I was reading, and it makes a claim that he's the oldest of the Irish gods, and he was the one who established Tír na nÓg, but I mean, you'll have to. All of these things are open to conjecture, of course. Just finally, on one more thing, Teresa, before we go. Start off the book saying that it wasn't a matriarchal society, but it wasn't quite equal as well, and we shouldn't put our 21st century ideals on people. So could you explain maybe some of the differences between, men and women during those times?
Women had rights that other cultures, like Greco-Roman culture, did not have. Women had the right of maintaining their property in marriage, and women had the right, they could fight in battle with their men, and then you had, of course, female druids, and so that was possible, but they still reckoned their kin through paternal lines, and they counted, and there was some polygyny in among the ancients, and so you could be the son, counted as a son of your mother's name after it, like Macnessa,
sure,
like Conor Macnessa, and so forth, and that may be as a result of polygyny, which they practiced then, also concubinage, and in fact, marriage laws of early Ireland were kept all the way up till the time of the Reformation. The Catholic Church could never eradicate their ideas of child marriage, marriage by adoption, marriage by buying a bride with a bride price from her father. And so it was still a kind of a patriarchal society. There's no denying it. Although some authors try to insist on saying it was matriarchal, but we don't find much evidence of matriarchal societies in history, but we do find some societies were reckoned kin through female lines. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, the Celts didn't do that so much unless it was a product of polygyny, and they did practice fosterage. So children were going to go be sent to live with another set of parental types, would learn a skill or a craft or something that would
you see this with, like, I think Cuchulainn was one of the biggest examples of this, because Cuchulainn had 7 or 8 different people and families he was warded off to. He would go learn poetry from this guy, he would learn his battle techniques from this guy, he would learn, I don't know, how to be a great, fantastic lover or whatever it was from someone else,
Yeah. He did.
Yeah. He did. He was so good, he slept with a god, isn't that right? He went off to Scotland and was with one of the Scottish gods learning to fight or something like that. Have I got that wrong?
There was a female warrior named Scott.
That's it. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
He learned from her. They practiced these things all the way up to the Reformation. They were trying to get people to follow the marriage laws of the church, and they couldn't do it. And in fact, in Scotland, in Gaelic Scotland, there was trial marriage, being married for a year and a day.
Yeah.
And
I think there's still, sorry to interrupt you, I think there's still a tradition in Scotland that from time to time you hear of, it gets on like the British news or something, some 16-year-old English kids go up to Scotland and get married. I think once they're 16 in a day or something. I think there's, I don't know if they've changed it, but it certainly was a thing anyway. Teresa, look, I'm going to have to let you go. We've only really skimmed the surface of the book because we didn't really get into the gods at all, and we didn't get into any of the second half of the book, which is all about how to set up and how to be a practicing a druid and the different rituals and the ceremonies and the calendar. God, I had a question with the calendar. We didn't even get to them. Look, buy the book, everyone. It's brilliant, and I've learned so much about my own ancestral history from it. So, Teresa Cross, can you please just remind everyone where they can get you and also where they can buy the book, please?
They can get the book off Amazon. It was in pre-order for a few weeks until it came out on the 15th of December. It retails for $20 US. I don't know how much it retails for in pounds and euros yet, but I'm sure you can find it there. All you got to do is just look up Secrets of the Druids by Teresa Cross and get it and enjoy it. I myself am of Scottish descent, and I can with a little Irish and Welsh in me, and I do speak some Gaelic or Scottish Gaelic, so.
It's probably much better than my Irish. Well, I mean, I know how to say, Slán go fóil, Ganairi on Bóthar Leat, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, Ganairi and Bóthar Leat.
That's probably my favourite of the Irish sayings. Do you know, I had an old book when I was in 6th class in primary school, and we used to have Shanuckles in the back. We had this little red notebook we all had to have. We had to learn the Tishel Ginnadoc. So any Irish people will know that just wrecked our heads, because it's the grammar of the Irish language. The Irish language isn't all that difficult, but this part of it's quite hard. But he gave us 70, 80 of these kind of triads of these Shannocks, and I'd love to find it. I really need to get that book, because it's full of wisdom, and he was a great teacher.
Yeah.
Teresa, look, I'll let you go. Thanks so much. Thank you very, very much. I'm really excited because I love the book. I loved it so much. It came along at the perfect time for me as I was looking into and trying researching more about Druidry and especially about the spiritual side of it. So thank you for writing the book and putting it out for a second edition, and I hope it goes really well for you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for the interview.